Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session, The Truth About AP Automation, 3 Challenges Holding Back Your ROI, in collaboration with OnPhase. To start, my name's Beth. I'm an editor here at SSON, and I'll be moderating the session for today. As a note, this session does qualify for CPE credits as long as you are located in North America. View the session live, so if anyone's watching right now, you've already ticked that box. You need to vote in at least 3 polls, watch at least 50 minutes of the session, and answer our post-webinar survey, and make sure to click yes for the CPE certificate, otherwise we won't know to send it to you guys. Next, before I hand over to our speakers, we have some housekeeping. Firstly, the session is being recorded, so you will have access to the recording after the event. But to interact live, there are a few tools to note. We firstly have the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen where you can pose questions to our speakers. We always encourage that you do so, as we reserve time at the end of our webinars for an audience Q&A. Next, there's the attendee chat where you can make comments. So to start, please let us know where you're dialing in from today. We love to know where our members are based. However, throughout the session, please do leave comments in the attendee chat as well. If you have any technical issues, let us know, and either myself or my colleagues will do our best to help you out. Next, it's not easy presenting online, especially when you can't see the audience like we cannot right now. So we've included the reaction tab where you can send our speakers a smiley face or a thumbs up. So please do use that tool if you're enjoying the session or agree with a particular point. Finally, as always, we have our resources tab on the bottom right of your screen with some great additional resources from our speakers, sponsors, and the SSO network. You can also learn more about Elizabeth and Tara and connect with them on LinkedIn if you wish. So to support today's session, we have a copy of the slides for you to take, as well as the CFO's ROI playbook, why 89% of finance leaders are racing to automate. We also have an article from Process to Profit, calculating the ROI of AP automation, as well as 5 key questions to guide your AP automation strategy. And finally, there's a link to learn more and connect with an expert after the session. So that's all from me. So I'll go ahead and hand over to our lovely speakers.
Thank you, Beth. What an intro. We are very excited to be here. If you missed the beginning, we are going to dive into the truth about AP automation and 3 challenges holding back your ROI. My name is Tara Pollack. I am the Senior Director of Marketing here at OnPhase, and I am lucky enough to spend a lot of my days really understanding the challenges that face finance leaders today. So like many of you on the call, and trying to understand the pain points and really what keeps you guys all up at night, right? And then making sure that our OnPhase team is well aware of these, putting those in our product roadmap, and really ensuring getting our clients and prospects in the market to really the next level, right? To true automation, because we really need to focus on growth, right? And join with me today, I'm very excited to have Liz Garrity from Bottomline. Liz, you want to introduce yourself and your role and tell everyone a little bit about Bottomline and how that fits into the AP ecosystem?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Garrity, Partner Relationship Manager here at Bottomline. So for those who may not be familiar with Bottomline, we're a global business payments company, also handling cash management and other sectors of the payment space. But as it relates to our partnership with OnPhase, you'll hear me say pay mode a lot. So that is our business-to-business payments network. And a bit about pay mode: we process over $500 billion of business payments annually with 0 instances of fraud. And we have a network of over 600,000 vendors, and that number is growing all the time. So I work with our fintech partnerships to manage their programs and get them transforming the way their businesses, their customers pay and get paid. So very excited to be here presenting with Tara, and yeah, looking forward to sharing more.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. So as you can see, you'll see both sides, right? We're going to get perspectives from myself, more on the AP automation and kind of completion, as well with Liz on really a lot of her experience in the payments optimization side. So we are excited. But before we get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about OnPhase in case you're unfamiliar. So OnPhase, really our mission here is to reclaim time for the AP teams, right? And we want to make sure that we're not just another tool or kind of getting you to partial automation, really taking off that manual work so you can focus on the strategic work of finance. And so a good way to think about that is, if I could take some of that manual work off, where would you spend your time? That's really where we try to fit in. So we've been in the space for about 25 years, working with so many great organizations. And one of the big things that we know with automation in payments is security is more important than ever, right? I think each year it's going to get more and more important with everything that's going on. So we take our security serious for our clients, and we're backed by AWS. But really where we try to focus is the Office of Finance. And what does that mean, right? So the Office of the CFO runs on documents. We all know that. So most finance teams leverage about 2 to 3 different providers here under these processes of capture, automate, and pay, right? So what happens when you have a couple providers doing these types of things, right, is you triple the cost, complexity, and errors. And unfortunately, we know that too well, right? So at OnPhase, we're able to offer our customers a way to really truly capture all the data that they need, automate their processes, and pay their suppliers all in one platform. And so our goal is to transform the Office of Finance from a cost center to a strategic value driver so you can protect your bottom line. So it's a little bit about OnPhase and where we fit in, but today, this is why you are all here, right? This is the reality of the market that we're seeing. So we're gonna address that elephant in the room right from the bat. And so a lot of the research that we've been seeing in the market here is about 40% of organizations are stalled at partial automation. So you got a little bit into automation and kind of digital, and that's amazing, but we're still stuck. And what this looks like is invoices really are still costing $9 on average, right? That's too high. The cycle times from the invoice to pay, 9 days. Things like that really trip up the teams, right? And because of that, what happens, and the ROI doesn't fully materialize, right? And so I know Liz has a lot of good stories and client success that she's going to share all on this reality, right? And what's on the other side. So like we mentioned, our mission here is to really talk about those 3 challenges that we're seeing as key themes. We have built a framework on really how to calculate the invoice cost. This is something that I know that comes up in all of our conversations with prospects and implementation, of asking for really what it's costing companies today. And the answer is most of them don't know, right? And there's a way to get there and really be able to present the current state, right? So we can help clients get to another state, right? There's a lot of talk and there's a lot of strategy, and we love brainstorming, but nothing is better than having an actionable roadmap, right? After a webinar that you can actually take and get things done and really start to get in a better direction. And we'll be talking about some real strategies that we've seen results as well. And so that's kind of our mission here today. But we always love to start with you. We are here for the audience and really making sure you guys are getting the most out of today's session. So we're going to go ahead and launch our first poll. So which challenge resonates most with you? And the best way to think about this is you as an individual and your experience in your career. A is set it and forget it. Automation just works, right? B, automation ROI is immediate and obvious. C, we need better data and metrics before starting. Or D, I have a different challenge holding me back. Would absolutely love for you to share that in the chat as well, so Liz and I can keep that in mind. And then Liz, do any of these resonate with what you guys have been seeing when you're talking to some customers here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of these definitely do resonate, and we'll talk about all of them, but I would say B definitely is a piece of it. Everybody is obviously anxious to, get the most ROI, but I think, it's important to remember that choosing a new software and a new partner for this is just one piece of the puzzle. And you can go live with an amazing new software that's going to change everything. But if your process on the back end isn't also changing to, support that, then it won't be immediate. So it takes a little longer sometimes, but looks
Yeah.
like our results might be in.
Yes. So the winner here we're seeing is C. 64% chose we need better data and metrics before starting, which is interesting, and we're going to definitely get into that. And then we're kind of have a tie in second for automation just works, and automation ROI is immediate and obvious. And then 7% I have a different challenge in the chat. So thank you guys for sharing. Put that in the chat, and we'll kind of get into that. No surprise here on the poll results, but this really helps Liz and I as we kind of go forward, kind of talking about all of these. So that's a good thing we'll be discussing. Okay. So moving on here, the 3 challenges that we're going to really talk about today at length. Most organizations we've seen really fall into these 3 that are really stalling their progress. Like I said, some organizations might have partial automation or have kind of taken, some of that work off, but they're not where they need to be, right? And that's why you guys are all here today. But the good news is once you recognize really where you're falling and tripping up, you can break that down and figure out a game plan going forward. So the first one we're going to talk about is believing automation runs itself. The second challenge is expecting immediate ROI. And then last but not least, waiting for perfect data. So let's just get right into it. So the first one here, believing automation runs itself. And so this is something that you guys are all familiar with, the term straight through processing, right? That is thrown around a lot, right? But when you think about that, we all know that your organizations change, right? You get new vendors, the business looks different from year to year. Things might change on the back end. There's different types of people involved, right? Which all happens and impacts finance, right? And so when you think of the straight through processing, without a constant management and understanding and optimization, those aren't going to go up over time, right? And so that is something with this challenge, is just to understand that automation also needs strategy, right? Automation can get you so far. Obviously, there's a lot of technology, but it's definitely not a set it and forget it. And so really, like Liz mentioned, is like when you're out there looking for, partners and software, is really understanding that your business maybe right now might not grow or change, but you in the finance world, you guys know that changes all the time. There's different people, employees come and go. You might have mergers and acquisitions. And so really being able to optimize and monitor and having a pulse on this and how it impacts the business is really a big thing with this challenge, right? And a lot of that comes down to exception handling, right? Those are the tough ones that no one likes to deal with, but they cause the biggest problems. And so that's really where a lot of businesses can trip up over time, and knowing that true automation, getting all the way to the end of very high straight through processing rates or straight through capture is like we get stuck on, right? And there's no surprise, right? And so I think knowing this challenge and really understanding and empowering the team internally is one of the biggest things. So I know payment really comes into this, right? That's like more of a strategic part, right? That I think some people kind of forget about. So Liz, what are you guys seeing around that challenge as far as like payment optimization on that side?
Yeah. So we see this all the time with payers, customers across all industries, that they will build an in-house solution for electronic payments as part of this overall strategy and think, I got every single vendor in here, or, usually it wouldn't be every vendor, but they got as many as they could on a digital payment method, in-house ACH typically, and it gets all set up and they think, now I'm done. I have digitized my payments. And part of that, first of all, setting it up in itself means gathering and validating bank account information there, but keeping it updated then becomes your problem as well. If you're the one handling this, it is not a set it and forget it. Vendors are updating their bank account information, but without you actively reaching out and making sure you have the updated information and then validating it again and storing it, those payments could, not get to the right place if you're not keeping that updated. So that maintenance really does need regular, attention. Not to mention, adding new vendors also needing to be onboarded, and, having outreach to your vendors that aren't yet on that electronic solution, some stragglers that want to stay on check for whatever reason. So unless you are regularly reaching out to convert more of your vendors onto an electronic payment method, that will kind of remain stagnant. So, what you could do about that, of course, working with a company that kind of takes that off your plate so that your AP team isn't bogged down with those tasks, and working with somebody that can validate bank account information for you, having the vendors update that themselves so that they are owning that piece and making sure payments get to them in the right account. That's just a few things that we see, but we do see this all the time, that people think, I set this up, so we're good, and that's really just not the reality of it.
Yeah. No, it's such a good point. Sometimes I say, like, the automation is just the beginning, right? It's like getting those vendors set up, the maintenance, but like, again, there's so much change, right? In any business, even if they're not doing some like really big strategic things internally, that there needs to be monitoring like across the board, right? And so I think that success, like, from a long-term perspective, right, really has to have people owning and managing that, whether you decide that's internal, right, where there's a lot of resources on that, or to Liz's point, there are partners that offer this, right, and can guide you and kind of have those resources if you don't want to do that internally. But we know that the most successful teams have that in place, right? And it's figuring out how to get there is really like the big takeaway. So that is challenge 1. We will move to challenge 2 here. So expecting immediate ROI. And going back to the poll, I'm pretty sure that was our winner here of the experience of the attendees, of really their biggest challenge. So this probably sounds familiar, that the CFO wants to see the ROI in 1 quarter, right? Or pretty immediate. It's like, hey, we bought that software, or we have that partner, or things like that. Like, how's it going? Where's the ROI, right? That instant kind of gratification. But we all know that more of the high level, something that CFO really is trying to get to, is the strategic cash flow, right? And that takes time really to compound, right? But that's why the numbers of the ROI of the investment, like, are they paying off, right? And I actually kind of just alluded to this, that the cost per invoice reduction, which is a lot of where like the process starts and capture, and trying to get that more in an automated fashion, like that's just the beginning, right? That's the beginning of the process. That's usually where people try to start. But in order to get to the capital improvements and, the supplier relationship and the payments, early payment discounts, things like that, that's kind of bringing it all together, right? So there's ways that you can find kind of that ROI in the beginning, right? That there is some immediate ROI, but it's not on that long-term view in the entire process. And I know, Liz, you have some things to share on that end.
Yeah, of course. So definitely true that it is, not necessarily possible to just turn your cost center into a profit center overnight. And of course, we see it all the time. People are very eager to monetize payments, or expect, very quick ROI from what they just purchased or what they just implemented. But it can take over a year to actually see those meaningful updates. Every company is different, of course. It can be very quick, and you can get some very quick, meaningful wins. But for example, with the payment side of things, beyond early pay discounts, there are companies in manufacturing, healthcare, education, others can usually expect to see about a 50% match of their vendors who are already using an electronic payment method that is monetizable with a payment network. So, what that means for you is, if you were to give your 12-month spend history to see who matches up against that network. You could expect half of your vendors to be in there ready to accept payments from you on day one that you go live. And so that is very meaningful spend that could turn into real revenue for you quickly. I think where people get tripped up and they forget that 50% on day one doesn't mean that you will get revenue from those vendors on day one, because you would need to pay all of those vendors right away to see that result. So I think that's where the year kind of comes in, is if we're looking at 12 months of your spend data, and then you have half of those vendors ready to pay immediately, unless you're paying them all every week, it could take, up to a year for you to pay each of those vendors. But again, every business is different there, and it totally depends. And then the other piece of that is, what about the other 50%? If they're not on an electronic payment method on day one, then they would need to be added and onboarded, and they would need to enroll. So that's kind of where we come back to, the importance of having a partner that helps you with that process. And enrollment in itself can take a little time. You could have a vendor that is thrilled to get off check and get onto an electronic method, but it still means they have to go through that process. They need to get validated before they're ready to be paid. And then it depends on when you're scheduled to pay them. So we definitely see quick and meaningful ROI, but again, not immediate. And it just requires multiple teams and individuals to be on board and understand the strategy. But with that focus, you can really get there. It's just not overnight, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we'll get into this, but I think sharing some of that, right, of the ROI that you do see, right, within a certain amount of time, and then the goal, what you're seeing over time, to your point. We all know this, but all invoices aren't paid in that same month, right? There's quarterly things like that. And then you sometimes get a little bit out of it and you're like, that's true. Like we have quarterly payments for this, and it's like, we just paid that, right? So we're not going to see that for another 90 days, right? And so, your business the best, and really trying to develop a framework and being like systematic to the ROI and really tying it to your specific business is really the best bet, because nobody likes to blanket generic questions on the immediate ROI and not being prepared after, right? So amazing. Okay, we're going to get to the challenge 3 here. And so the third one is good old data, waiting for perfect data, right? Analysis paralysis is expensive. So we like to look at this as, if you're waiting on perfect baselines, your competitors, they're capturing some of those early payment discounts, for example, right? Revenue opportunities are lost during inaction. And every month that you're waiting, because you're waiting on perfect data, is money left on the table. There is opportunity to optimize, even if you're like, our data's not there yet, we're not ready. We've all been there. And so we're going to get into this soon, but we have a true cost framework that works with imperfect data, and figuring out ways to start to measure now and then figure out ways to improve, right? And so Liz kind of talked about this too, about the 50% vendor network match rates. So like there is some immediate value, right? That you don't have to wait for something that's perfect. And so a good thing to think about with this is, perfect is the enemy of good, right? No one's going to have perfect data. And so Liz, anything to add on this, on the data front?
Yeah, absolutely. So prior to my current role working with fintech partnerships, I was working directly with payment customers and helping them monetize and maximize their programs. So I worked with some who just said, I don't want to send you an updated vendor file yet. I need to clean up my ERP. I have vendor numbers in one field and added characters in the DBA name, and I need to just clean that up. You're not even going to be able to match with this if I send it to you right now. And I said, well, send us what you have. I had a lot of, some that would do it regularly, others that said, I just need to clean this up. And one in particular was straggling and just waiting. And when they did eventually give me their data, which still wasn't perfect, they had over $82 million of check spend that instantly became eligible for electronic payment. And, I think something to remember is that with that data, yes, it might not be perfect, but we can work with it. There are, of over 600,000 vendors in a network, we have matching logic and backend systems in place to help clean that up, as well as large teams of humans who cross-reference and make sure that that's all, accurate, and they can do a lot to work with whatever we have. So that's, real meaningful updates that you can make. Good news there actually is that was a couple years ago, and we've seen a shift away from that kind of file-based methodology to get vendor spend over to the network. And, instead of file-based, a lot of times there's an API connection, which means that that manual effort of pulling files no longer applies. And with that, API kind of connections with the network push data directly from your system to OnPhase and to your pay provider, meaning that gets updated in real time, and it's something that can be chipped away at without needing to have it be a big daunting task. So that's another thing that we've seen that's actually helped combat this. But yeah.
Yeah, and the funny part is we understand because, AP finance, one of the amazing things though, people in those roles are very analytical, right? All data driven, and just personally wanting to make sure that everything is right and accurate. But it shouldn't be stalling, right? It shouldn't be holding you back because there's all of the good on the other side by getting started and getting some of it going so you can see some of the benefits right away. But all right, we are going to move along here. We have our second poll. So those were the 3 challenges. And so our first question was all about you guys and what your challenge that you were seeing as an individual in your career. And now this one is all about what challenges impacted your organization the most. So A, assuming automation runs itself. B, expecting that immediate obvious ROI. C, waiting for perfect data before acting. D, all of the above. Or E, we avoided these, and tell us your secret. I would love to hear anyone that has avoided all of these. That would be amazing. And you guys can help us today. All right, we'll give it a minute here. Okay. Let's see. I think we have some answers. And so the winner here is all of the above, with 41% of you putting that in the chat. So that's really good because we are going to dive into these challenges a little bit more here. Runner up for 30% was assuming automation runs itself. And then the next one, expecting immediate obvious ROI, and then waiting for better perfect data. And no one picked E, but that's okay. That's why we are here discussing this today. So thank you guys all for sharing. And this gives us some good insight as we kind of move along today. Okay, so we're going to move on to what happens, right, when these misconceptions drive decisions. And the majority of you said that D, all of these above were challenges at your organization today. And we know that the consequences of having these kind of misconceptions or challenges, and some of them are like maybe even a myth, right? There's hidden costs to these. And this is kind of what we're seeing, what these add up to. So project stall at 31 to 50% adoption. So you get some benefit, right? But maybe never fully get that ROI. You're never really seeing that, maybe the savings materialize, whether that's time savings or costs or rebates or anything like that. Compliance gaps really get discovered during audits. And that's always happens at the worst possible time, right? That's when the challenge comes and everything halts and stops during that audit season, right? And one of the things that's probably the most difficult to deal with as leadership loses confidence, right? And so that next automation initiative or, optimization or kind of investment in the tech, or whether it's your process, is harder to sell. It's harder to sell that transformation when that confidence is lost. So what do we do about that, right? How do we break through? And so really the truth around here is kind of recapping what Liz and I were talking through, some of the challenges and why they exist and things that you can think about is breaking through. The truth here is, in order to have success, you have to have ongoing optimization, whether that's internally at your team. There has to be some level of like accountability, ownership, but also choosing the right partner software provider to help you. Having a cash flow focus and having that really understand the impact, not just efficiency, right? Because cash is king. That's really where leadership kind of zones in on and trying to understand the ROI, making sure compliance, and we haven't talked a lot about that yet, but we will in a bit, and is designed intentionally, right? And coming up with those strategic metrics. So it's really thinking through the lens of like, this isn't just about figuring out a partner or a software to help our business. It's transforming, right? The right process. And once you have that perspective and you can get people internally, that's when you can kind of break through. So I referenced this earlier. We're going to move on to, okay, this all sounds really great, Tara and Liz, right? But how do I do this myself? We put together a true cost framework. So this is really how to calculate like what the AP and payments is really costing you internally. So it's a good breakdown to start from if you don't know where to start at all, which we hear a lot from clients. And one of the ways to do this is figuring out what are those direct processing costs, right? Is it labor? Is it technology? The invoice costs, right? And coming up with that baseline and doing that analysis and kind of adding those all together, because what we see here is having a baseline for companies, and some of them are really ranging between $13 to $20 per invoice once you do that baseline. And it's an easy way to do it once you break it down per invoice of all of the, the costs that are included from a hard cost. But then think about the hidden costs. The hidden costs are delays, exceptions, rework, things like that. And then on top of that, think about, the missed discounts, late fees, things like that. And exception handling. Those are those sneaky ones that always get in, that have like the most like kind of the killer to the team, right? They come in and that exception handling alone can be a huge % of your costs. And so we kind of put this framework together of like going through the motion of figuring out what these would cost for your organization and writing those down, right? Figuring out that baseline, asking the right people internally, and figuring out where to start, and then calculating where that could be post optimization. And so I know, talking to Liz earlier, that she has a really great example of this.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. So I know we're talking partly about the physical cost, the very tangible costs of, a check payment can be up to $12, your calculation on the cost of invoicing. But, those hidden costs I find have been what's been really impactful in a negative way to teams that aren't up to speed on automation, especially from that payments perspective. So, one example that sticks out to me was a client that I used to work with. It was a property management company, did commercial real estate, and they had recently transformed their solution from almost fully paper-based check only to, an electronic payment method through payment. So they had a team of 3 that was handling this, one person owning about 90% of the workload for checks. And I got the opportunity to go on site, and she gave me a huge hug because she was so happy with how things were going after they switched over. And she was telling me about her day-to-day prior to, switching things and going electronic. I mean, anybody who's worked with paper checks would probably relate, but they had to print, stuff them, work with the bank directly on, positive pay files, reconciling. If payment didn't go through, they would have to reissue, deal with cancellations. There were dependencies on U.S. Postal Service, weather delays. every single kind of frustrating thing that you could imagine was on her list of reasons why they were so happy to move away from that. And then, just the automation wise piece, knowing that you have one place to send all of your payments without thinking about that, and easily check the status of that payment, was really impactful as well. So I feel like those are just those hidden costs that now freed her up to do the rest of her job and not just manage payments, which was taking up a huge amount of her time. And so I don't know if that's an extreme example or if it's going to resonate with some of you, but it's not just her I've heard that from. So, that's kind of the goal, is getting away from that and getting you back to doing the fun parts of your job. So
Yeah.
that's
Oh my
definitely
God.
what I've seen.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing that, as you were talking, comes to mind for me is you don't have to you don't have to do this alone, right? Where I think most of us are like, oh, this is my business. This is like my responsibility and things like that. But that's why there's so many strategic partners out there that have frameworks, that have calculators, right? There's ROI calculators, there's the rebates, there's invoice processing, right? And to say, you know what, I don't know, right? And then if you reach out to, some of those partners and trying to build that framework together, it'll become more and more accurate. And then they can help you kind of see the other side of it, of like, okay, this is where we would do this. This is like, because it's hard. We know how busy you are, and there's just so much going on in your everyday normal life, right? And that is like, besides like month end, audit season, all those types of things. So a good thing is to know there's frameworks out there, and you don't have to do it as an internal project sometimes. And I think a lot of people will take that route, but it's just something as a really good takeaway. So awesome example. Okay, we are at our next poll. And this is talking about, what is your biggest cost leak in AP? So we're talking about that framework, trying to figure out your baseline. The first one here is manual exception handling, which I've referenced a few times there. The B is delayed approval process. C is missed early payment discount. D is lack of baseline and metrics. And E is we don't know, we need better visibility. And if E is it, that is fine. We hear that constantly, of not having visibility and honestly just not knowing. That is a super common thing that a lot of organizations face today. So Liz, anything to come to mind, Andy? Anyone you would choose that you're seeing constantly?
Yeah, I feel like if it's hard to choose just one here, I think I've seen some of these challenges having that domino effect and leading to another. So
Yes.
for example, B, delayed approval process can stall out your payment, leading to C, missed early payment discounts. So just kind of compounding that challenge. Depending on your payment method, we definitely see C as a common frustration. And the natural kind of delays that come with outdated solutions there. So yeah, that's definitely what I've seen a lot of, and it looks like some of those are resonating with you all as well.
Yeah, so we have the winner here. 46% of you said manually exception handling. And the next up is delayed approval process, with a tie for third of the D and E of lack of baseline data metrics, and we don't know, and then early payment as that last one. But a little thing with manual exception handling, like you mentioned, Liz, I think that's one that actually really does compound, right? Because that's really at the beginning of like getting that data in. Is it accurate? What are the fields that are missing? Maybe it's not in the ERP, to your point. What do we do with this? And that's where the time suck really happens for teams. And so it's really good that it seems like a lot of you do know. That's like the biggest thing, right? That when there's a lot of challenges going on, knowing is like, knowing's half the battle, more than half the battle, I would say, in AP probably. And so we'll kind of get into that first. Okay. So like I mentioned at the very beginning, if you think about all we talked about here, we talked about the challenges, we talked about the cost framework, things like that, some examples here. But now we need to figure out how do we put this in action, right? You guys have been so great talking about where your challenges are personally for your organization and where you're seeing the cost leak. So first up, really start to use that true cost framework. It's okay if you're guessing at first, right? Just starting is something that happens. And this actually reminds me of a conversation that, a lot of our finance directors, when we're out at shows, they're like, I honestly don't know, right? So it's a catch-22. It's like, I want to start, but I don't know how to start, right? And so really start with that cost framework, start to figure out where the biggest areas that you believe that you're struggling with. And with that, throughout the process is really trying to figure out where those top 3 quick wins are, right? Because we all know we have to kind of figure out where to start and don't start everywhere. And I think really starting with that, you have that framework, right? And figuring out, okay, maybe it is manual, maybe it's handwritten invoices. We got to figure out how to capture this better with technology and automation. Maybe it's the paper checks, things like that. Where is really that you're struggling as an organization, and building that stakeholder business case. And so what we're constantly hearing when we do have clients that, they go live, they say like, wow, this isn't just in our AP team, right? It's beyond the office, the CFO. There's so many other people that we all know are involved. And making sure that the right stakeholders are involved is step 3, absolutely. And then figuring out a pilot, right? Don't tackle it all at once. Go back to where your quick wins are, and then figuring out with your business, like Liz and I were just alluding to, give that time without throughout the process of knowing your business that like, hey, these invoices we only pay quarterly, or these big payments come up end of year, things like that. Make sure that that timeline and that scope really resonates with your business. And so this is a simple framework. This is where you should start. But we all know you should start with immediate impact, right? And so one of the things that we constantly see is figuring out where that high volume and low complexity invoices are. This will give you the biggest automation kind of percentage quickly, right? Right off the bat, the simple ones first, which is interesting because we all know that those exception handling, the ones that are tougher is where everybody wants to start. But if you can take off kind of that majority, because that goes right into your approval workflow, right? You can eliminate some of those delays, which then have an impact on the cash flow. And we all know that you guys want to get to those early payment discounts, right? But until you tackle those first 2, it's very difficult to get to an early payment. And then really just that last one of, trying to understand where you're tracking and optimizing. If you're not doing that, then it's really difficult to figure out how to measure here. Just looking at time, I think we're doing pretty good. And so we wanted to share with you guys just different ways that you can really figure out that the kind of the roadmap, right? Before was kind of a framework, more of like building that business case and understanding before getting people involved, doing quick wins and planning for that, planning for the change, right? Planning for change management. And then really this framework that we wanted to share with you guys is really figuring out a little bit deeper, right? A little bit deeper of like current state analysis is always step 1. Again, look for vendors or partners in the space that can help you do this. You are not alone in this. That's a big takeaway here, I think. And figuring out process optimization. I think this isn't talked about as much. You guys know your business so well, you need to understand that the process will probably change, right? But trying to figure out what's a better process. The words of, well, we've always done it this way, right? Those are things that we got to power through, we got to overcome. And when you figure out where you're going to go, an absolute like phased implementation, there's so many parts to this, as you're aware more than anyone. But you guys have to keep running a business at the end of the day, right? Those invoices keep coming in, those approvals, the payment, things like that. And so figuring out really where to start is really crucial to long-term kind of success here. and the continuous improvement. I think that's something that really needs to be stressed. We know that it is not automation runs itself. It's not set it and forget it. And figuring out, last but not least, to scale, right? That's kind of the goal, right? There should be enterprise adoption. This isn't just something that can impact finance, team members and within the department. You really want to be able to kind of move the needle and be a strategic partner towards the business as a whole. And so these are just kind of broken down for you guys here of what they each kind of look like, of how you can kind of identify this. And there's just different ways of really trying to think about assessing and designing. And I think the biggest thing here that I would call out is more of like designing around future state workflows, right? This is how we do it today, but this is how we really want to get to, right? But without understanding where you're at, you can't design a new future, right? We're going to move on to phase 2. This is deploy and optimize. Again, start with a pilot group. Don't tackle it all at once. You have to figure out how to monitor and adjust. And the biggest thing I would say on the capture piece, because we know that that's one of the biggest pain points in the entire capture, automate, and pay, is starting with the pilot group. High volume suppliers, the basic invoices, take that off your plate now, right? And then get to the more complicated ones, because that's the way that you can kind of start to see some of that immediate return in the beginning. In phase 3, scale. This is where you want to get to, right? This is like the ultimate goal of having that type of KPI and reporting and continuous improvement, and really having, as many suppliers as you can, electronic, all of that type of stuff. I put this here for a reason, because we've been talking a lot about like just starting, quick wins, figuring out where you need to go. But we can't think of the long term, right? The cash flow optimization is typically a lot of what we're trying to get to in visibility at the leadership level. So it's really important to make sure that this is part of the phased approach. So we have our poll here of where is your organization today? And we just wanted to see where you guys are all kind of resonating here. In that kind of approach, are you still assessing your current state? Are you in the design process, which is B? You're actually piloting in early implementation, which is amazing. Or are you on D, you're scaling successful automation? Or E, looking to optimize existing automation. So go ahead and put your responses there. All right. Oh, this is exciting. As they're coming in, I see they're actually kind of pretty equal across the board, which is good, which means you guys are all really trying to break through some of those challenges that we talked about today, and figuring out where you can go. Yeah, they're pretty much, there's 3 top contenders. So the majority of you guys are still assessing current state A, and pilot early implementation, and scaling successful automation. So that is really positive and really good, but we know, again, there's always something to optimize and improve. So good for you guys. And we're going to move along here. I'm just looking at the time. I'm conscious of everyone's time on this call. So we wanted to kind of really ask you guys if you're willing to share, like, what's really stopping you? Like, what are those barriers from getting to the next level, wherever you might be, whether you just said you're scaling, you're optimizing, you're still assessing. So what's really stopping you today and from some of those challenges? So go ahead and put your honest answer in the chat. And we will kind of talk through some of the common themes that we've seen in the space today. So first up is leadership buy-in. This is huge, right? Businesses lead, they lead with business outcomes, not technology features, right? And so instead of saying we need automation, it's more of like we can reduce invoice costs by 60%, right? Free up 15 hours. Start with a small kind of pilot program, like I mentioned, and get approval from leadership. So those are just some ways that you can kind of really show that ROI, right, in the business outcome. Change management, we hear this time and time again. You know your business the absolute best, right? But that resistance is real. The key is to involve your team in that solution design like we were talking about. When people help build it, they don't typically resist it, right? Focus on what they're getting versus what we're taking away, right? It's not about eliminating jobs. It's really eliminated about the tedious work, right? We all want to do more strategic work. The third one, integration complexity. These, fears are, they're valid. We've all heard those kind of like horror stories, right? But making sure that you're going with a modern platform that's designed for integration, pre-built connectors, APIs, like Liz mentioned, things that are just really built in for really efficiency and for your team to be able to focus on other tasks. And budget limitations, we hear this, budget constraints are tough. They're especially right now. And so one thing is to show the cost of doing nothing, right? Those hidden costs that we just were talking about, to figure out how to calculate, or figure out a way to, even have the technology pay for itself, right? That huge thing with that of like rebates, with different partners you can choose to figuring it out. And so really the truth here is identifying those barriers, the challenges, and acknowledging them up front and planning around them versus that whole like, let's pretend they don't exist, right? And so let us talk about our last poll here today. We really want to encourage you guys to take action. So share with everybody, what is your next step after today? Let's see. I know where I would start if it was me. Okay. Give it another couple seconds. We definitely want to leave some room for questions that we can see coming in here. All right. Okay, I think we got a little bit of a tie here for first. Next step after today, A, calculate our hidden costs. Super happy to hear that. And we have C, research automation platforms. So those are the top two answers. Super happy to hear that. Also build a business case, was right there up there, and then schedule a stakeholder alignment meeting. So all of these are super important steps, like we mentioned. And I think the key here is taking this all in, taking notes, figuring out where you guys are going to start. And I know Beth mentioned at the beginning, these slides are all available for you. So I know we went over examples and a lot of framework and steps, but it's a really good way to kind of get started, right? So some key takeaways here that I can't stress enough is misconceptions are expensive, right? A lot of them are hidden. These are challenges. There's resistance. There's change. There's a lot that goes into really transforming a process. And so that's a really big thing to kind of cut through, and we all need to overcome, right? The next one is true costs are hidden. Really trying to calculate that, figure out what those mean, and really putting it in a business lens, right, of the business outcome. So your leaderships can get bought into that and really understand. And the last one that we talked about a lot is the ongoing optimization, right? This is not a set it and forget it thing. We all know that that sounds really good, but there's a reality here. Businesses change, they optimize over time. And we know that AP and payments is a very crucial part of the business that deserves some more, management and attention, and you don't have to go it alone, right? So start with what you have, improve as you go, but really start now. And so we want to bring Beth back here, and she's going to help us with some of the questions that we were receiving.
Amazing. First of all, thank you so much, Tara and Elizabeth, for delivering such a great session. And I think we'll just jump straight into some questions for the last few minutes. So our first question is, can you give some top tips on how organizations can measure the success of an embedded payment adoption?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that one. So Something that's really great is the visibility that you would have in your own system around matches and then payments that you can be making right away to your vendors. So I know we talked about that, estimated 50% of your vendors that would appear in the network. So prior to any kind of decision making around that, you would be able to see that estimate, of course, what the estimate is for how many of your vendors are exact matches in the network, what the spend is, and then therefore what your potential rebate earnings would be. But then, of course, once going live, you would get all of that data right back into your system. Again, in this context, we partner with OnPhase to provide that through pay mode, all in one place. But then as far as an ongoing success measurement, both of the OnPhase and Bottomline teams exist to provide regular updates around the growth of your payment program, how many of your vendors are enrolling actively, and then as they do enroll, those get reported right back to your system so that you know when someone is payable. And then as far as measuring towards your rebate goals and how that looks, you would also have access to all of that, of course, as you make your payments and see those rebates coming in. But there's also a lot of features to help with that visibility, like reporting that can be provided to show you, hey, you have these reported already in your system, and we can see that they could be payable electronically, but they are actually still being paid by check, or you haven't paid them yet. Why is that? We saw that a payment went out, last week through check, even though they are payable through card or ACH today. So, the OnPhase and Bottomline teams exist as an extension of your AP team to kind of help you get the most out of your program. Again, that's really just from the payment side of things, but you're not alone when it comes to measuring how this works and how successful it's been. Great question.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And next question I can see is, in what ways can businesses leverage invoice processing coupled with embedded payments to enhance vendor relationships?
That's a great question. I can start, maybe Liz, you can add. So a couple ways that we really see ways businesses can leverage that is internally, there's a lot of benefits, right, of that cash flow cycle. For the approval time goes a lot a lot down. I think the beginning slide I had about like 9 days, that was like kind of from invoice to pay, right? So there's a lot of internal benefits to that, building those approval workflows, making sure the invoice is captured 100% and getting that pay quicker, because no one wants that stuck, right? It goes back and forth, there's manual, you're dealing with a lot internally. So there's a lot of internal benefits to the workflow, the approvals, getting that like in and out of the business right away, and it doesn't get stuck, right? Or carrying over at month end, you don't know where the status is. But then on the other side, to enhance that kind of vendor relationship, there are things like early payment discounts, right? So you have to be ready in order to do that, to make the early payment. There's also dynamic discounting that comes into play, that if you can get in a really good place, that maybe it's really a net 30, where you could also try to pay them, on a different net, to have a different type of dynamic discounting. So really the answer is, there's a lot of internal benefits to coupling that invoice processing with embedded payments, as well as external to your supplier. So it's twofold.
Yeah, and just something to add there too is, obviously there's that visibility on your side to see the status, but your suppliers also have the ability to see the status of a payment. So rather than a check going out the door and them just waiting, not knowing where it is, they can see exactly what the status is, when it'll be funded, when it'll be deposited. And so that's really helpful too, from, them being able to track towards those early discounts on your behalf.
Brilliant, thank you guys. And I can see we're nearing the end of our time, but I would like to sneak in just one last question. As I know a lot of our members like to take away sort of a practical insight, sort of finish on. So I feel like this is a good question. So what kind of internal resources are really needed to make this successful?
So my answer to that is your existing team members. So we typically see that you don't really need to be adding any headcount or any like project manager or anything like that. It's actually typically the opposite from the on-phase perspective, is because we have a whole dedicated team when we start to work with a client to talk about that design, that optimization. You have a dedicated customer success manager, an account manager, an implementation specialist, a project manager. You have a payments expert as well. And so really the dedicated resources is just your internal knowledge, right? And the people that know your business the most. And so you can really keep it inside the AP team with your existing resources and really leverage us to help design what's best for your business. And I don't know, Liz, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, I was going to say you need to hire a whole new team just for this. No, you're right on, Tara. Yeah, I think, you guys are the experts on your own business and we're an extension of that. So exactly what you said, the folks on board at your organization are the experts on what you need. And then we're here to help you customize that and make sure it's the best strategy for your business.
Okay, brilliant. And as always, I have to be the bearer of bad news that we are unfortunately out of time. But I first of all want to say a massive thank you to Tara and Elizabeth for joining us today and giving us such great insights. And as well, thank you to everyone who's joined us today and taken the time to ask questions and leave comments. It's always great hearing your perspective. But before we go, just as a final note, be sure to check out the resources that we've supplied for you guys, as they're really, really helpful, as well as filling out the post-session survey, especially if you are looking to claim at CPE. But that is all from us. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.